2 minutes. Sorry about that. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me for the first Cannabinoids and the People newsletter that is coming from my new basement studio. This is number 28. As you can see, the videos ain't Stanley Kubrick yet, but it's a work in progress, and it's all built out of the books I inherited from Uncle Buck. So a little piece of fun engineering. Keep the good drug books here close at hand. So I'm Lex Pelger. I do the newsletter Cannabinoids and the People, which is on Substack. You can subscribe for free to get all of the new cannabinoid science. And as well, I do cannabis counseling for individuals and teach them how to use CBD, cannabis, and psychedelics if they're interested in that for their health. One-on-one sessions, and especially tell the older people in your life. This can be so good for people over 50, and that's who I'm the most used to talking to and walking them through step by step how to use this stuff, where to buy it, not where to how to not spend more than $100 on it, kind of the goods and the bads of how the things go. Let me take off these glasses. Let's give it a try. And so that's what I do for individuals, and always happy to talk to people. You can see that at whitewhalecreations.com. As well on whitewhalecreations.com, I have a company where I make educational content and podcasts for cannabis and psychedelic companies. So that is what I do professionally, and then see lexpelger.com for my personal work, like my endocannabinoid graphic novels based on Moby-Dick. And one editor's note is that I am going to my first conference in 3 years this week. I'm going to Basel, Switzerland, so a quick little flight from me here in Bordeaux, France, for the IACM Cannabinoid Science Conference. So I'm very excited to go, and what I have here is my first new business card in a while since I've been off on my own this past year. So it'll be nice to go out and mix it up and shake hands and see people again. I miss that. So if you're happening to go to IACM, shoot me a line and let me know. And if you have any chats for people in the live stream, let me know, and I'm glad to hop on questions or whatever you think about this stuff. So got to put these back on to see, even though you can't quite see my eyes. So this week, some of the top science was really great work on cannabis for pain and chronic conditions of older people. I will die on this hill. This is amazing for pain in older people. It's not opioids, but it can really help change things for people and help decrease opioid usage. That's a thing you hear all the time from the surveys and from the studies. CBD products can continue to fail. CBD products can continue to fail on CBD concentrations and heavy metal contamination. So buy from our sponsor, CV Sciences, maker of Plus CBD. They do great work. And I know they make really good CBD. I worked for them for a number of years. Also, there's a look at the heart harms and psychosis risk from cannabis, which is real, small, but real. Using cannabinoids for opioid use disorder, as well as inflammation problems of the gut. In history, cannabis smoking for funerals 2,500 years ago in China, feeding hempseed oil to your chickens for better eggs, and one of my best new Neuronal Ocean metaphors involving whales, gay bars, cocaine, and electric eels. So we'll probably end on that. So the one thing I will say is this has been sponsored by Plus CBD. You can find their products at pluscbd.com. And what I focus on this week for the ad in the newsletter is how much research they've done. Not only have a bunch of great educational content, some of which I helped create, and some of that I've seen other people there create that you can find on podcasts. They have videos. They have a YouTube channel. They also do research. They put money into actually furthering the field. They did a GRASS study, generally recognized as safe study on their hemp extracts to prove their safety, which is a number of different tests that is a standard in the industry. And they were the first to do it by far, and only a couple other companies have ever bothered. They also did a clinical trial on healthy people to show that hemp extracts help their cholesterol, their sleep quality, their stress response, and the perceived life pleasure. And there aren't enough studies being done on hemp extracts themselves. So much of it's being done on isolated CBD. And you can see when they do the head-to-head comparison, usually CBD full spectrum hemp extracts with all the other minor cannabinoids and terpenes and fatty acids that are building blocks for cannabinoids, both in the plant and in us. All of those other components help the CBD to work better. And usually your CBD will work better if it's in a full spectrum hemp extract, and you'll need less CBD to get the same effect even. So that's why I always believe in full spectrum hemp extracts, except when you can't fail a drug test. But if the scheduling of cannabis is moving forward, maybe there won't be as much drug testing going forward. So, because there is minor amounts of THC in hemp extracts, it's unusual to test positive from taking rec- uh, regular amounts, serving sizes of full spectrum hemp extracts, but it can happen, and you do have to be warned about it if you're in a job that is zero tolerance. So CBD also did a post-marketing safety study, 2 years of their adverse events, and they did a case series of using CBD to treat PTSD. They also funded me to create the science archive at cvresearch.info, which I would encourage you to check out. cvresearch.info. I put a lot of work into that, and it's up to date as of not too long ago, a couple weeks. And it is broken down by either conditions or by body organs, all of the endocannabinoid evidence. It's more heavy on the CBD stuff, but there's review articles at the top and then the timeline of research at the bottom. So you can pretty easily get the breadth of what they're saying in an hour of reading for each of these systems. So, with no further ado, let's look at the best of cannabinoid science each week. And the first one is a little bit older study from 2021. It's a survey of older adults, and it found that their medical cannabis use to be helpful for chronic conditions and for pain. And I wanted, even though you hear this a lot, I wanted to put it at the top because it's so important. Older adults are often scared of using hemp extracts, either of getting ripped off because they've heard so many this is going to change your life kind of things over their lifetime, or they're scared of that little bit of THC in there, or is it marijuana? What is it? So that's what I try to educate on. You can see some of my advice for various conditions at whitewhale creations.com. But there's so much information out there about how older people, just people over 50, can benefit from CBD and cannabis. And so it's nice to see surveys saying about chronic long-term conditions and pain, because that's what I've heard the most from people in my years of interviewing and listening to people talk about what helps. It just helps them usually to feel better. Does it change everything? No, but it can be a change of 30 to 50 to 70% in whatever they're dealing with. And that in itself can be life-changing. And speaking of the pain side of things, in a Florida survey of medical cannabis patients, 79% reported a reduction in their pain medication. That's a huge amount. Uh, that the majority, by far, the majority of people said they needed less pain if they were using medical cannabis. And so sometimes that's CBD rich, sometimes that's THC rich. In general, THC seems to be more for pain, but it can be different for different people. And I would usually recommend starting with CBD for 2 weeks, see how it does for your pain, keep taking it at the same levels, add THC, and see how much better that does. If you take it orally, it's going to be a little bit stronger, but it's going to take a little longer. If you do a vape pen, it's going to hit right away, but it might only last an hour or maybe two. And as well, there's always topicals you can rub in your skin. So those are the three main ways that I think older people should be utilizing cannabis. And luckily, with the potential change in laws coming, it's going to get even easier for them to do that. And if you want to get THC in your system, that's one thing I love about CV Sciences. They're really great formulators of products. And as far as I know, they have the best and the only THC type product like this. And it's just a gummy or a capsule with 2.5 milligrams of THC and then a whole bunch of milligrams of CBD. 2.5 milligrams of THC is a perfect amount for an older person to be taking. It's unlikely for them to feel a psychoactive effect. If it is, it would be very small, and it would also be balanced by the CBD, which tends to lessen and make less intense the psychoactive effects of THC. They say CBD protects you from having a paranoid trip in general, but most people won't feel THC as any kind of high type feeling. They might feel more alert for their day. And so it's kind of like a millidose of THC. 2.5 milligrams is a great way to get there. And to just have it in a gummy or capsule is a great formulation, especially for older people who want to try this and be very, very exact about how much they're taking, when they take it, and what happens to them. So, speaking of pain, this is a really cool study. It is sponsored by Tilray, the big cannabis company out of Canada, but what it's saying rings true to all the other stuff that I know. And they did a survey, a large prospective study of pain patients who started using cannabis. And when they started using cannabis in Canada, they went from 152 milligrams of a morphine milligram equivalent. So that's basically a standard measurement for how much opioid someone's taking, whether it be oxycodone or morphine or heroin itself, any of those other drugs out there. This is the equivalent. So keeps it at one number of how strong that opioid is. And so if someone's when people started taking Cannabis, they went from 152 of those morphine milligram equivalents down to 62 milligrams. So 152 milligrams to 62 milligrams after 6 months of use. So they knocked it down by 2/3 the amount of opioids they were taking, and 78% of them saw a reduction in their opioid dosages. So it really speaks to how much the cannabinoids can help with pain, and they can help the opioid painkillers to work better. And that is so clear from the science of things because the cannabinoid receptors you have in yourself often interact and even lock together with the endorphin receptors, your own morphine receptors that you have in your body. And so, of all the crossovers your endocannabinoid system has, one of the strongest is with the endorphin system. And I'm actually reading about that now because that's going to be my next Get to Know a Neurotransmitter article in my Project CBD series, where I've been going over the endocannabinoids and how they interact with things like serotonin and dopamine and the other big neurotransmitters. So, another study let me check this live stream actually. What's going on? Okay, cool. Good. So, no comments yet, but it seems to be streaming. So, excellent. Um, in humans, a pilot study showed that THC helped to extinguish fear conditioning induced by visual stimuli and electric shocks. So basically, people were put in a room and certain fearful visuals we showed and then begin electric shocks at the same time. And so your body starts to tense up and get used to it. The Pavlovian effect, and you can induce it reliably in people. And it turns out that as people to help people forget that fear conditioning, how long it takes until it gets turned off where they see those images and they don't shock because the shock isn't coming this time. THC helps to extinguish that fear conditioning. And so this is why you hear about so many people using THC for PTSD. One thing you hear the most from veterans is that they're using huge amounts of THC every day. I interviewed so many veterans across the country, and they would just be dabbing huge amounts of THC, and they would not be getting that high. I mean, these were good family guys. And it seems like when people have serious conditions, the psychoactivity of THC sometimes gets eaten by those conditions, whether it be pain or PTSD, and people just don't get that high. I mean, they notice it, they feel it some, but they wouldn't get high like a more recreational user would at those kind of levels, especially because people tend to develop a tolerance to THC, especially the psychoactive effects, and so as well as the motor coordination effects. So for people using tons each day, they tend to it doesn't affect their driving that much, and they tend to not get that high, but it helps to cool that fear conditioning they've had from the trauma that they experienced before. So this small study confirms something that you've heard so often from people with PTSD, that THC helps them to just have less of that fight or flight response. And it makes sense with what we know about how much the cannabinoids interact with the dopamine system, as well as the acetylcholine system that is your adrenaline. So, a another study that is interesting because this is one that actually worried me, and it is about whether the use of cannabis altered the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccine boosters. And the reason that people would be worried if they were smoking pot and their vaccine wouldn't work as well is because, in general, THC tends to be an immunosuppressant. Uh, and with the complexity of the immune system, that is never completely true. There's always exceptions for various cases and conditions and what you're dealing with. But in general, THC calms an overactive immune system. And so that's why you hear about so much with cannabis for autoimmune disorders, where the immune system is going haywire in a certain organ and attacking that organ. Cannabis helps to calm down that autoimmune response. And CBD does as well. And so the fear would be COVID-19 vaccines are creating an immune response. That's how they're working by making your body create these antibodies. And if your cannabis is suppressing that antibody production, you might be less effective. And so this is a study out of Israel where they had a very widespread rollout of vaccine boosters that was well documented. And there they found it did not alter the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccine boosters. So this study seems to ease the fears on that front. I think more research should be done before we can be positive on that, but it's nice to to have a first look that it probably isn't screwing things up there. We also have a review article about targeting the endocannabinoid system for the pain of irritable bowel syndrome. And I wanted to just put this in there because every week I want to mention something about the guts because so many people have gut problems, and the endocannabinoid system is hugely widespread throughout the guts. It also interacts greatly with your serotonin system. And you might think of serotonin as your neurotransmitter of happiness, but you actually have more serotonin in your guts than you do up in your brain. And so the endocannabinoid system works partially with the serotonin system, partially with some other systems to, in general, ease pain in the guts and to restore homeostasis by all of these different mechanisms. If you go to cvresearch.info and go to the gut section, you'll see how much I had there, and how many charts there are about how it works. Um, so if you know people with gut problems, they should certainly be trying to target their endocannabinoid system either with cannabis or CBD acid. Uh, that is the raw form of the CBD molecule before it gets heated. So what's in the plant? All of the cannabinoids in the plant are in their acid form: THC acid, CBD acid. These are slightly different molecules. They just have another oxygen on them, basically. And so, but that small difference is enough that we don't think it crosses the blood-brain barrier. It can't get you high. So that's why you can't eat cannabis and get high, because the THC acid isn't gonna get you high. The THC acid and the CBD acid have to be heated to become their more active form of THC and CBD. That's why you have to either light the bowl or bake it in the oven to, the technical term is decarboxylate the THC acid to THC. The thing about CBD acid is that it's really, really good for the guts. We don't have a ton of studies on it, but you hear about it as one of the biggest underground uses out there. And it's people juicing the hemp plant and then drinking the juice. That is what they're mainly getting in there is the CBD acid, as well as a bunch of really good fatty acids as well. But CBD acid seems to be a really great molecule for the guts in general. And so you can buy CBD acid from in the raw products of CV Sciences, and it is worth trying for people with gut problems. I would always start with CBD first, just because it's easier to find, easier to test. But CBD acid might be the thing that really helps you with your gut homeostasis. And in that vein, there was a review, this was actually from 2020, that looks at all the trials of chemotherapy causing nausea and vomiting. And a pretty amazing finding: cannabis worked better than the conventional antiemetics in all of the studies that they looked like. And it wasn't a ton better, but it was slightly better. And the conventional anti throwing up drugs are not pleasant drugs to be taking. And cannabis works better than them, at least a little bit. So in general, it would be smarter to, when you have nausea problems from chemotherapy, to start with cannabis instead of starting with the drugs that they give you, especially if you don't mind cannabis. If you're getting high anyway, maybe just not smoke it. If you're going through chemotherapy, take it orally or rectally. One of the best, safest, cleanest delivery methods, and one that doesn't get you as high, and excellent for the treatment of cancer itself. Um, so, and this speaks to the classic story from Lester Grinspoon, who was the first scientist to really go on a limb and say, no, no, cannabis is a medicine. And he did this from within the federal government. He's a hero. And if you don't know his story, it's worth looking up. And his son, Dr. Peter Grinspoon, is worth following online. He's still carrying the torch for this, and for harm reduction in general. But Lester Grinspoon's son had a childhood cancer, and nothing was helping with the vomiting. The kid would see their nurse in the supermarket and start immediately vomiting just from the Pavlovian association there. And finally, one time the nurses were like, why is this kid not throwing up this time? Why is he eating a sandwich? That's never happened before. And it's because they finally tried it, and they let him smoke a little bit of a joint out in the car before he went into the hospital. And it worked. It worked amazing. And that's when Dr. Grinspoon became this hero advocate who said, no, no, we need to look into this. And he was yeah, he was very brave in doing that. That was not a popular thing for anybody to be doing. Even Carl Sagan, who believed that at the time, wasn't coming out and saying it out loud. He called himself Dr. X in his writings on that kind of subject. Um, so on the negative side, which, by the way, if you are good, okay, we're getting near the 20-minute mark. Great. Just finishing up. If you are someone who follows this newsletter, you know I like to focus on the harms because that you need to. And it's too bad how often the advocates say, oh, there's nothing wrong here, including the cannabis-induced psychosis and the links to schizophrenia. This is a look at the data from the Nordic countries from 2000 to 2016. And in general, the frequency of cannabis-induced psychosis doubled across that time span. And cannabis itself can cause a psychotic event. People can get too high and it pushes them over the edge for a short time. It also seems like in people who are inclined to schizophrenia, the cannabis can push them into their first episode of psychosis, just like another trauma would, like a car accident or a death of a family member. But you could also argue that if they never had that first cannabis induced psychosis session, they never would have been pushed over the line into schizophrenia. There are links with the earlier you start to use cannabis, the later chances of schizophrenia go up. Are these giant links? Absolutely not. But are they there? It's very clear. I have a piece of research on this that seems legit every week, at least one or two of them. It's something I strongly believe. And you need to know if you have schizophrenia in close family members and you're at risk, cannabis is something to be treated with a lot of respect. Probably wouldn't use it if I were your doctor, but I'm not. And this isn't medical advice, but it can certainly bring out schizophrenia in people where there's already a latency to it. The other thing that people don't talk about is heart problems from cannabis use. So I have in here a case report of a young man having what they eventually termed to be a cannabis-induced toxic myocarditis, a heart attack. And so, um, and oh, not some, oh no, myocarditis is different. An infarction is the heart attack. And so, but this isn't actually about this case report. It's about the literature review that goes with it, because there are so many case reports like this about young people where their cannabis use seems to be the cause of their heart problems. But it's hard to tell. Everybody's complicated. It's easy for a a cheerleader of cannabis to say, "Oh, it's never the cannabis." Except you have these really excellently designed long-term population surveys or from these various government databases where they track people for a long time for various health stuff. And it's true. If you're using cannabis, you're more likely to have a heart attack, an arrhythmia, which is an irregular heartbeat, or a stroke later on in your life. Again, is it a huge risk? No. Is it stopping me from smoking? Again, absolutely not. But it's good to know that that is there for people with heart problems as well. So I think it's one more to be honest about. And for this week's scary research, using vaccines to combat cannabis use disorder. I've never seen anything quite like this, but it's a synthetic cannabinoid vaccine that's supposed to block the effects of THC for people who are addicted to cannabis. Not to say you can't be addicted to cannabis, but this seems like a terrible way to handle it. A vaccine that makes them not able to get used to it. Um, so the thing I wanted to end on is my neural ocean metaphor. So I generally don't go into the other stuff about the news that I cover, but I cover the war on drugs, and harm reduction is very important to me. I cover psychedelics and other psychoactives. Um, and the two last things are the origins of cannabis smoking. This is an older paper, but just came up again, and it's about the ritualistic use for funerals in 500 BCE in Western China, using cannabis. They had big braziers of cannabis at these mortuary centers, places where they take dead people and we assume had ceremonies, and they were using this 2,500 years ago. They were having cannabis lit there. What they're doing with it, we don't know. Was it for a psychoactive effect? Not necessarily. It could have been just burned to be nice or be something that caused a little bit of psychoactive effect. But we do know from Herodotus about the Scythians. That's one of the most famous uses of cannabis in Western literature. And with the Scythians, who were these kind of big, brutal horsemen of the ancient world, they would at their funerals, they would have huge amounts of cannabis and they would throw it into the fires, big trees of it, and it would get everybody high. Just like when they do big burn, then the DEA does big burns now, and some of the cops get high from it. That's what they did for their funerals, which sounds like a pretty good way to do it. If to all my friends out there, that's what I would request to be placed around my coffin for my funeral. So I think that is a really cool old use about how this was done. Um, and so let me find my, um, okay, my neural ocean metaphor and check for any live stream questions. No, great. Um, so the last thing I'll talk about is this is a pretty chemical level, biochemical drug thing happening. But if you are using a drug to protect the brain that activates both your CB1 receptors, which are generally up here, and your CB2 receptors, which are at low levels up here and help the immune responses in your brain. If you're activating both those receptors with a drug, and then you add a drug that's called an allosteric modulator, a positive allosteric modulator, something that increases the binding to your CB1 and CB2 receptors. So basically, if the top of the head is where the regular binding site is, the allosteric might be here on the side. And this is what CBD does for CB1 and CB2. CBD is a negative allosteric modulator of CB1 specifically. And that's important because if you have a little bit of CBD here on your side, it changes your binding up here. And it means that THC doesn't bind to it quite as strongly. And what that does is that it makes you not get as high, and it protects you from getting way too high. And so that's why the presence of CBD protects you from paranoid THC trips. And so going back to what the study is about, if you have a drug that's binding to CB1 and CB2 up here, and you add a drug that's a positive allosteric modulator here that makes things bind better here, you're going to protect the brain better. And you're going to do this by reducing the amount of glutamate being released. Glutamate is your brain's primary excitatory activating neurotransmitter. It's actually the most widespread in your brain. It's your brain's basic green light. For all the neurons, if they're going to send their messages and fire the synapses, it's glutamate that is the general signal for that. And so by activating your CB1 and making it stronger with the modulator, you're lowering and lowering and lowering that release of glutamate. And that's keeping the neurons from getting too excited and burning themselves out and dying from too much excitement and too much glutamate. So I have a neural ocean metaphor where I've been using in my endocannabinoid graphic novels based on Moby-Dick. And the ocean works so well because it's very unexplored. And inside this ocean, that is our brain, you have different neurons, and they are like city states. A neuron is incredibly complicated, and all of them are talking to each other. So it's like a whole network of cities under the ocean, and they use different ways to send messages to each other. Sometimes they send neurotransmitters like fish or whales, and sometimes they use electricity to send messages down across to each other, down the length of the city, and then at the end to release the neurotransmitters to the next one down. So the electricity is for inside the cell communication, and the neurotransmitter fish are for outside the cell communication. And so in my metaphor, the CB1 receptors are the bars in the outside of the city walls. And the CB2 receptors are the gay bars on the outside of the city wall. They're a little bit better at calming things down. And so if you have, and in this metaphor, the cannabinoids are whales, of course. So if you have a cannabinoid coming in at the CB1 receptor bar and the CB2 receptor gay bar, and then you give that whale some cocaine, so it goes to those bars longer and harder and stays there and jazzes them up more. What they'll do while they're there is tell all of the electric eels of glutamate that are there to chill out and to dance instead of going out and exciting this neuronal city to death. So that is what I think happens when you have a drug that binds the CB1 and CB2 receptors and you make it stronger. It's like giving a chilled out whale cocaine and telling it, dance with these electric eels so they don't fry this city to death with their energy. So I'm going to end on that metaphor. I hope you like it, and let me know how this live stream is going. See you. And the last thing is, I will not see you next week. I'm going to the to that conference, and so this will be my I won't get a chance to do the newsletter next week. So I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye.